Well, welcome to the fourth webinar of West End Resilience Live. First, apologies to those who tried to join last week's webinar. Technology got the better of us, but we do now have this rescheduled for this Friday at 10 AM. So do contact the New West End Company if you haven't received your invitation. There are two parts to today's webinar. First, we're going to be hearing from Jace, Tyrrell and Dee Corsi from New West End Company, who will outline the advocacy and operational work that they are doing to prepare for the reopening of the West End. Then we will hear from Alex Williams from Transport for London, who will talk through the situation from their perspective. Please note that we will be holding two separate Q&As for the two parts, so please save any questions for TfL until after we have answered the questions for New West End Company. And you can, of course, as always, put your questions to our guests by clicking on the question mark, which you should be able to see on your webinar window right now. But for more on what's coming up, let's cross over to Jace.
Martin, thank you very much indeed, and welcome back, New West End Company members and our partners and our friends of the West End. And I'm very pleased with our partners at Microsoft. We're on point today with the technology, and you've been able to join us this afternoon. So as Martin says, we're thinking about the reopening of the West End and the resilience around that. We had the Prime Minister's announcement and further government announcements in the last couple of days, which means potentially some of our West End businesses can start to reopen from the first week of June. So we've been thinking a lot about what that can look and feel like for the West End. I have to say we've had incredible feedback from our members who are operating in China, in parts of Europe, that have really started to understand what a safe and sustainable reopening can look and feel like, and some of those key lessons we can learn across retail, hospitality and leisure. And also the very important aspects of public transport and public realm that we also need to consider as part of our reopening activity. So I'm really pleased that my colleague Dee Corsi will be outlining some of those plans and guidelines and taking some questions on that. What I want to do is just briefly touch on our advocacy work. And at New West End Company, we're representing 600 businesses right across Bond Street, Oxford Street, Regent Street and our neighbouring 80 streets, and feeding in almost daily to government, to the Mayor's office, to the Westminster City Council on the sort of measures and activities that we need to work together on to really help you, our members and our West End businesses, and also the West End wider community work through this next phase and start that gradual reopening of the West End. We've split our work really into four key areas, and the first area was our relief measures. So for the last couple of months, we've been joining industry colleagues to really ensure there are adequate relief measures and support, particularly on financial measures, for a lot of our members and West End businesses that had to close right through this period. We now move into the reopening phase, so we're having far more granular conversations with Westminster City Council, with the Mayor's office. I'm really pleased that Transport for London is able to join us today, and how we have to really work together to get this safe and sustainable opening right for the West End. And of course, we're going to move into some form of recovery in the coming months, perhaps a year ahead. And that's going to require some very different policy measures from the government, from the Mayor's office and from our local authorities to work through with businesses in the wider community what many of our businesses will need: staff coming back to work, customers coming to the West End, and of course our local amenity and community. And our fourth R is about repurposing. And what's so striking about this pandemic is some really incredible and pronounced changes. So we look at all the benefits of air quality that's happened in the last couple of months in central London. We look at the big structural shift in e-commerce and what the new normal of retail and leisure and even hotels and hospitality will mean in that new world. And also some incredible work of local community work, outreach, advocacy, volunteering, and actually that spirit of coming together and really working through this. We want to continue in that spirit with businesses, with our community members, with people that work in the West End. So we'll come back to this theme of repurposing the West End for the future. But today's focus is really on reopening, our top priorities being about a safe and sustainable reopening. And I think we all recognise we're going to have to be agile and fluid as we come through the next couple of weeks and months ahead. And all of us are going to be very resilient as we work through a gradual reopening of the West End. So I'll pause there, and I hope there'll be some questions for myself and Dee, but over to Dee to talk about some of the guidelines and operational plans for our gradual reopening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today to talk through our operational plans. So following the announcement on Sunday, we are now working towards the first week in June for our full retail district reopening. We have no known restrictions on store size, so we're all good to go. Our plans have been shared and we are working alongside Westminster City Council to deliver all initiatives within the first week of June. And we are also working very closely with our local policing team, who are supportive of our measures and are continually monitoring the most effective deployment of Metropolitan Police resource. So our proposals are split into two core areas. Firstly, physical interventions across the district, and then secondly, our additional resource to support our businesses and visitors. So first, in terms of installations, we are planning a number of self-serve hand sanitisation points across the district. These will be a mix between freestanding hand sanitisation points and totem structures around the base of lamp columns. These also double up as branded points across the district, and also a reminder of social distancing for everybody coming into the area. Secondly, we know that nothing quite replaces washing your hands, so we are proposing 4 actual hand washing locations across the district. These are mobile cubicle units, which will be a strictly 1 in, 1 out policy, and will be managed by a cleansing operative to ensure that they remain clean and disinfected throughout the day. Whilst there is no government guidance still clear on face masks, we have managed to procure a small amount of non-surgical grade face masks, which will be available at these points and other key locations. Moving on to social distancing and queuing systems. Whilst it's incredibly difficult to predict the immediate impact, I'm sure that we have all seen in other European cities where lockdown has been lifted, the queues from day one outside of stores. So this is something I'm very, very conscious of, and this potentially is the area of most challenge. At New West End Company, we are advising all members to be as consistent as possible and to have queuing systems to the left of store entrances. Now, whilst we say this, we have already begun work with certain brands. We know this isn't always possible due to fire exits, etc. So what we do ask is that you work with us so that we can have the best coordinated approach across the district. Whilst individual stores remain accountable for queuing systems, at New West End Company, we want to work with you, our businesses, and the local authority, as I say, to ensure that this can be a well-managed experience. As this stands, there is no requirement from the local authority to install physical barriers, which will take up valuable pedestrian space, but instead we are looking at 2-metre markings on the pavement, which all of us who have been to the supermarket over the last 6 to 8 weeks are now familiar with. At New West End Company, we have the ability to work with all of the brands now in the area and affix these dots outside of your premises for you. The benefit of us doing this for you is threefold. Firstly, to create some uniformity across the district with the same social distancing queuing messaging. Secondly, we have the ability to work on your maximum queue capacity outside of your stores, given the exterior space and any government or local authority guidelines. And thirdly, if we affix these adhesive dots for you, then it will be with our own cleansing regimes in mind, so that we don't come along and clean them partway through the day. Our own street teams can also affix our own messaging and our own dots. To avoid queues, we are also aware that some brands will be looking at booking appointment systems for shoppers, which we are of course supportive of. However, we know this won't be appropriate for everybody. There is clearly a requirement to not only provide more pedestrian space and change the perception that the West End is far too busy and overcrowded, but also to provide more space for social distancing measures and potential queues. So we are working with partners and the local authority on temporary lane and road closures across the district to widen footways and give us more space. These plans with Westminster City Council are due next week. Getting into the West End, we'll hear more from Alex in a moment or two, but we know that due to social distancing measures, capacity on the tubes, trains and buses are severely reduced. As a result, we expect both visitors and workers to come to the West End using walking and cycling. Therefore, to help support this, we'll be promoting walking and cycling routes across the West End, and also online cycle park maps and some additional cycle parking across the district. For our West End welcome, we will be installing our Union Jack flags across the district, accompanied by Thank You Heroes flags as a tribute to our frontline workers. The overarching message is around national pride in the nation's ability to get past COVID-19 and thanking all of our key workers. Moving on to enhanced resources, we are currently working on the visible deep clean of the whole district ready for opening. Once open, we'll be focusing our cleansing teams into a more daytime activity to both create an enhanced daytime service for businesses and to increase customer perception of cleanliness. We have also managed to secure new technology which uses disinfectant fogging to sanitise wash stations and other public sites such as benches. We will have one customer service operator at each of our wash stations to ensure proper management and disinfecting during the day, and one roaming operator to make sure all sanitisation points are full at all times. These will be removed at night and replenished each day. In addition to our current security team, this will be enhanced by providing further daytime security to assist stores with external queues and also to help manage wash stations and sanitisation points. Lastly, we'll be enhancing our nighttime dog patrols, again to help manage the district and secure those physical installations. So I'm very happy now, Martin, to take any questions.
Well, thank you for that, Dee. Let's go to this question first of all from Paul. How quickly do you think we will get back to normal numbers of visitors?
Goodness, I think that's a $64 million question. I think it's probably who knows? We're looking at predictions of possibly up to 2 years before we get back to the footfall we saw before.
Okay. Just a reminder, if you want to put questions, all you need to do is click on the question mark icon, which you can see on the webinar window, pop your question in there, and then we'll be putting it to Dee and indeed or to Jace. Hold back on any questions re TFL, because we'll be coming to them after we've heard from TFL. Let's go to Bill here, who says, what will happen if the virus comes back when we have reopened?
Well, I imagine we will follow government guidance, and if we need to put in additional measures or go back into something more serious, then we would have to follow the guidance we were given.
Dee, don't worry about this if you don't have a specific answer to it, but it's a question from Nancy. And I suspect this is really actually a question for government, but I'll put it to you anyway, just because it'll be interesting to get your view. Her point is, shouldn't we wait longer until we reopen to make sure that everything is completely safe?
I think as a mother and as a parent whose children are likely to go back to school in 2 weeks' time, I understand the conundrum. I think we need to, at a point in time, start getting things back to normal, and I think we have to follow government advice. And if they're telling us that from the first week in June, that's what they think, then I guess that's what we go with.
Okay, I just want to bring this point in. It's more of a point being made, but it's just nice to get the feedback. It's from Gareth, Chair of Oxford Street Management Group. Just wanted to acknowledge how supportive Jace, Dee and all of the team have been to our retailers on Oxford Street during this pandemic. The communication and support has been fantastic. We're all looking forward to getting the West End up, back and working soon. So on that point there. A question here from somebody who's remaining anonymous, but just a very simple question. Do you know where the 4 locations for these mobile cubicle units, the cleaning units, which you were mentioning earlier, do you know where they're going to be sited?
I have draft locations, and they are in the highest footfall points, which are by the gateways. So we're thinking Oxford Circus, Bond Street, for example, but we have to finalise those with Westminster, which we intend to do this week. So once we've done that this week, we can absolutely share those.
Okay, question here from Barry. Will there be a relaxation to parking loading restrictions for deliveries to allow flexible scheduling, which allows us to keep the scheduling and the deployment of our team members in line with social distancing measures? And building on that, will parking cost restrictions for the public team members be revised so driving to the West End is more viable stroke affordable?
I think it's on the last one first. I think it's fairly unlikely that we would be looking. I think obviously the council would be looking to reduce that so that parking is more viable. On the other points, as I say, we're working with the local authority with regards to certain lane closures and road closures and what that will do for curbside deliveries, etc. So that's something we're hoping we're going to get more guidance from next week from the council. So if we can come back to you next week on that, that would be fab.
Point here from Chris, will the 4 sanitising stations be enough for the whole of the West End? So
the 4 units that I mentioned, the mobile units, are actually hand washing units, but we have 28 as a minimum hand sanitisation points across the district, so 32 in total. Okay, question here from somebody who's remaining anonymous, and I think this is a really difficult question to answer, but I'm going to put it to you anyway. Do you have a view on footfall numbers in the next 3 to 6 months? If I did, I'd be a very rich woman, I think. Absolutely not. I can tell you that I think in China, footfall is, I think, back up to 20% where it would normally be. I think it will be different in every territory. I think, you know, it's a very difficult one to predict, just as it was when we closed, you know, 6 to 8 weeks ago. But it's something that at New West End Company, we have our footfall devices. It's something we can track on a daily basis, and it's something that we can share with members on a daily basis. So once we start to see that come back, that's certainly something we can keep you updated on.
Question here from someone who's remaining anonymous, but it's a good question. How many customers will be allowed inside each store?
We don't know for sure the government guidance on this, but in other areas, I think they are looking at a maximum. They're looking at it on a store size basis, and they are looking at around 20 square meters per customer. But again, we haven't quite got that guidance yet. I expect that will come over the next week or so.
One from James Pellet. When will the plans and locations of the cycle routes, walking routes, be available to members?
Again, something that we're working on with the local authority. Their phase 1 plans are due out next week. This will include cycle routes and walking routes. So bear with us, and by the end of next week, I certainly plan that we can share those.
Again, a bit of a crystal ball one, but when will international visitors start to return? This is from Jim.
Again, if I had my crystal ball, I'd be a very clever woman. It's just so difficult to predict. I think colleagues in the hotel industry are looking at bookings picking up or bookings being made potentially from September onwards, which feels a long way off. But I think we only have to look at our own travel restrictions to understand, you know, and quarantine to understand that. I guess, again, the same as the daily footfall, we have access to flight bookings that are being made in all countries, which we share with our members on a regular basis. So as soon as we get the information, we can absolutely update you.
Question from someone remaining anonymous, and I'm not sure whether this was covered in the guidance which was released earlier on in the week, but they're saying, when do you expect the government guidelines to come out for the retail sector? Is there anything you can add to that?
Jace, over to you on that one.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right? So I think what we had was very early guidance on Sunday, and we've been working with other industry colleagues on specific guidelines for retail. I think what's very apparent is it's still quite broad, and what we're looking for is very specific guidelines on PPE, on operations, on safety that's required, perhaps on the size of retail. So we hope that will be this week, because we're all seeking that guidance, because a lot of your plans on reopening preparing your staff and also what other equipment you may need is really predicated on those guidelines. So we know it's a pressing issue. I raised it with the retail minister yesterday on a conversation, and we were assured there'll be more details coming this week. Because I think what's really important is we set a standard for the West End, which is what our guidelines have started to do. And then obviously individual businesses will take decisions on how they want to look at protecting their staff and also their customers once those guidelines are clear. Can I just pick up on a couple of other points, Martin, just briefly, that were raised on footfall and demand? I mean, as Dee says, we need a crystal ball to sort of really anticipate what's going to happen. But what we do know from early sort of insight from China and for Europe, it is very slow to begin with. And actually, this isn't just about customers coming back to the West End, it's about a safe reopening. And we want to make sure our staff and our colleagues that come back to work in the West End come back to a very safe and resilient district. And also we want to make sure that customers start to feel confident to come back out into public spaces and to spend time in the West End. And from all of our forecasts and insight, we predict it will be slow. We think our local Westminster residents will be our first customers back into the West End. We really welcome them and look forward to seeing them coming back. And then it's going to be Londoners. And a lot of people are going to have to use cycling and walking to get to the West End this summer. And then as we get into the autumn and then the second half of the year, there will be a UK domestic market opportunity. But this is months away. So I think we have to recognise it's going to take quite a few months. And as Dee said earlier, probably years until we get anywhere near the levels of what we had in 2019. And perhaps the world of tourism and travel, I remember 50% of our West End customer base is tourists. It may change in terms of their demand and where they come from. So these are things in the medium term we have to consider. But really the top priority now is to make sure you have all the tools and all the resources you need from a district perspective for a safe and sustainable reopening.
Okay, to what extent, this is somebody remaining anonymous, to what extent could restaurants be allowed to place seating in public spaces? I'm guessing this is talking about just outside the restaurant on the pavement to continue operations safely outside.
It's certainly something as part of our plans with Westminster that we are looking at. I think priority is getting our retail open in June, and then clearly as soon as we can, we want our F&B open. You know, it's something that, again, that we're working at and looking at the space available. Jace, have you anything to add on that one?
No, I think the point earlier, we're going to have to be agile and flexible. I think everyone recognises we're going to need probably temporary measures as we start to think about reopening and recovery and how we use our different spaces in a different way. But it's going to be very challenging for hospitality, restaurant, hoteliers, and we're starting to work through some of that detail now. So it really starts from the government guidelines and how we can implement that locally and how we can work with you and Westminster Council on arrangements to help you bring back your staff and also your customers this year. But complicated with restaurants and hospitality, so we're going to have to repurpose how we use some of our roads and our streets as part of our gradual reopening of the West End.
Okay, what lobbying is being done on behalf of landlords? That question there from Graham. I'm guessing possibly for you, Jace, I don't know.
I don't know what specifically for landlords, but obviously as a New West End company, we represent both businesses and landlords. And I think we've been advocating very strongly for a range of measures to support both. And I think some of the measures on furlough scheme, the loans, I think the issue around rents is still an issue that I know the industry is continuing to talk to government on, and recognising that there's three in this partnership. There are the banks and the lenders, the property owners, and also the businesses. So I think there is still some further work that the British Retail Consortium, the British Property Federation are advocating on, that obviously we're supporting to really help everyone come through this and survive this period and have thriving businesses on the other side of this. So a challenge and something that we're continuing to make representations on your behalf.
This one from Sam. How can we ensure that people do social distancing measures on the crowded streets?
I think it's a challenge. I think it's something, however, that we are all getting used to as part of daily life. In the West End, we will be fortunate enough to have our own security teams, as well as, I imagine, a lot of staff, frontline teams, with sorting any queues or, any of the hand washing stations. So I feel as though we have a lot of resource and a lot of eyes and ears out there to help support the cause. But I do think that it is something that we're now all used to behaving in that way. But if not, then of course we do have our security and our local police who are always there to support.
We've got one here from Blythe. Do you have an estimate of the proportional total number of shops that will be able to actually reopen straight away as soon as they're allowed?
I haven't got a proportion. I think from a call that we had this morning, some are eager to open and will be ready to open from the 1st or the first week in June. Others are waiting for footfall maybe to return and might take a week or two longer. But I think the majority will be open by the end of June. So I think we won't be open everything on day one, but I think probably by the end of June we will be.
Okay, question here from someone who's remaining anonymous. Is this being viewed as an amazing opportunity to reduce traffic in the West End and to see how much benefit there is from better air quality for people who live and work and visit the West End?
I think absolutely it should be. I think we should take anything as an opportunity as this with both hands. There are a lot of temporary measures that will be put in place over the next few months, and they are temporary, but there is no reason, if they are successful, why they couldn't be there for a lot longer. So there is certainly an incentive and a real push on behalf of both us and the local authority to look at some of these measures that we can now trial and get in place.
Stephen here has a question. How will I get my staff into work? Most live far away, too far away to walk or ride.
I think that might be a question for Alex in a moment when we're finished on this section.
Okay, we'll put it to him, or if you want to re-put it, just in case we lose it otherwise. But a question here from Ewan. Crime has been remarkably low over the lockdown. Can we expect a sharp spike in crime rates when we move into this next phase?
I know firsthand that the Metropolitan Police are doing absolutely everything they can to keep the crime rates as low as they are now as we move into higher footfall and more individuals into the West End. They're working remarkably hard with the intel that they've got, and we're there to support them. So we absolutely all hope not.
Just looking down the list of questions here, do you expect to see, this is from Mark, do you expect to see stores varying their opening hours in the initial phase?
Well, actually, we've been providing advice to our stores that we'd like to be as consistent as possible across the district. So we are asking stores to start with opening hours of 11 AM and work until 5 PM. Some stores may go later till 6 or till 7, but we're trying to be as consistent as possible with the 11 till 5 up until 7.
Okay, I think we're going to leave the questions there. There are lots more questions, but we are pushed for time, so we're going to have to leave it for the moment. But Dee, thank you very much indeed for answering those questions and giving us the presentation from before. Just to know, we will be hosting a further operational session as the West End reopens in the coming weeks. But now let's cross over to Alex Williams from Transport for London. Alex.
Hi Martin, and thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar today. I thought it would be good for me to kind of give you a bit of context on where we are in Transport for London before we go into the questions and answers. So the first thing to say is we want to see London moving again safely and sustainably as quickly as we can. We are an organisation that is about promoting people using public transport, and it's a huge change to our organisation to convey the exact opposite message. I don't use public transport. However, it's quite clear that we have to be patient in this recovery and restart process, and it's going to take time. I do get the sense from the questions to Dee that there is that impatience there, but the reality is it is going to take time. And what I wanted to do in my kind of short introduction is convey two things. One is the scale of the challenge that we face, and also what is our advice, or what is government's advice that we're working very closely with on travel around the city. So the first thing is the scale of the challenge, and could someone put up the slide? I don't know if it's on. Is it on the screen, Martin? I haven't got. I'm talking blind, as it were. Is it on the screen?
We do have some slides up, so I would say don't worry about what's on the screen. We'll just follow you, and you just keep talking, and we'll try and keep up with you.
There's one slide on the screen, which is my slide, which is the kind of. It's got two charts on it, really, and it's probably worth me kind of explaining that, because I think that gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge. So the kind of blue chart on the left is what would happen on a normal day on the London Underground. So on a normal day, we would carry 4 million people in a normal day, and you would get that kind of peak set of movements there, the big AM peak and the big PM peak, and also a lot of people moving about during the day. Now on the right, you'll see with the beige colouring, you've got the solid blue is the amount of people moving around on the network at the moment. And since the Prime Minister's announcement at the weekend, we've seen a modest increase, but it's actually from a very low base. So as I say, on a normal day, we would carry around 4 million people a day. Last week, it was just over 200,000 a day. And now it's around 230,000 a day. So we're not seeing huge changes as a result of what was mentioned at the weekend, but we are seeing some incremental increase, as you would probably expect. And it's still very peaky. A lot of those peaks are NHS workers going to work on public transport. There's also quite a bit there of construction traffic, construction workers as well. But it's probably also worth me explaining the horizontal lines on that chart, which is basically the capacity of the network is severely constrained with 2 metre social distancing in place. And the blue line is the kind of capacity of the total network as it is today. On Monday, we will move that line up to the red line with an increase in capacity on our networks, on the tube network, on the bus network, and also on the national rail networks. But you can see it's still well below that black line, which is the kind of normal capacity that we'll be operating onto. The green line is what it could be if there's a change in the guidance, but that's not for me to determine. It's really for me to say that the reality is we're operating in a situation with very restricted and reduced public transport capacity to maintain social distancing. And the parallel is often drawn between what we're looking at now and what happened with the Olympic Games. And I think that is a useful parallel, because in the Olympic Games, we needed to reduce demand by around 20% for a 3-week period. And we did it. And we did it through effective messaging. And in some people, some members on the call might be saying we went a bit too far, I think, in the early days, but we got it down by that 20% figure. This requires us to reduce demand by 80%, and it's for a lot longer than 3 weeks for a special event. We would like it to be only 3 weeks, but we all know in our heart of hearts it's going to be longer than that. So it is a big, big challenge. So in terms of our advice, there is a kind of slight change in the government's advice, as we know from the weekend. But if you look at the advice from the Department for Transport and our advice from London, they are completely aligned. And they are work from home if you can, and shop locally if you can. If you do need to come into work, think about walking and cycling. And there's a lot of work with the local authorities to provide temporary additional amounts of space to accommodate people walking and cycling. We've increased the amount of pavement space in London on our road network, the Red Route network, by 5,000 square metres over the last couple of weeks, and we will put more in as we go. City of London are looking at very radical proposals for how they manage their streets during this recovery phase, and that's about more space for walking and cycling in particular. But clearly, we want you to avoid public transport and look at those roads. However, if you do need to use public transport, we do need to respect that 2 metre social distancing rule is in place. I think the Secretary of State and also in the DfT guidance have used the word where possible, because we all know on the pavements when you walk around London. 2 metres is not always possible when you're walking past someone, and in a underground tight tube network, there will be occasions where it isn't possible. So you need to. So we are putting stickers on our platforms and things like that to encourage people to space appropriately. We are advising that people wear face coverings when they go on public transport, and also we will be rolling out hand sanitisers at stations on top of the enhanced cleaning regime that has been in place for some time. The other thing to bear in mind, I think, that if you are going to use public transport is we need to be realistic. It's going to take longer. You know, in pre-COVID world, you would kind of hop on the tube for a few stops and, you know, you get there in 10, 20 minutes or something like that, and it would be really consistently good quality service, and you know how long journeys would take. The reality is the services aren't going to be as frequent. You know, we are increasing capacity, but we aren't going to be able to get the 100% capacity that we had before. There will potentially be queues at stations to get in them. If we're concerned about social distancing below, we may well put in gate line control measures at the station. So there are no significant queues outside stations at the moment, but if there is a huge increase in demand, we will clearly consider that measure about managing station safety as we do in the pre-COVID world. The other thing is to think about different times and hotspots. And I think one of the things that's incumbent on us is to get more information out there about hotspots around the city, and some of that information is available about, and they're mainly in East London at the moment, Canning Town, Stratford, those kind of areas where, and there aren't any in the West End, but I think we do need to, as demand increases, get more information out to people about when those hotspots, where those hotspots are, and also what times that they're occurring as well. So a big thing would be avoiding that morning peak when NHS workers are clearly the priority. The final thing I'd say is that you know, our messaging is going to be completely aligned with the DfT and government and the network rail. We want this to be a consistent and a national effort to get us over the line. However, I think we also need to be mindful that over time, as this recovery progresses, that advice may change. And when it does advice, that advice does change from Public Health England or from the Department for Transport, that will reflect in our guidance and how we operate the network and the level of measures that are in place to protect and make sure that people are safe. So the advice I've given you is as it is this week. In the future, as we go to different stages of recovery, potentially may change, but we will be consistent in our messages from what happens with DfT and other transport agencies. So that's probably it from me as a kind of overview. It is going to take time, unfortunately. I suspect I might have a few kind of crystal ball questions like Dee, but it is going to take time, and we're going to have to be patient, I'm afraid. But I'm very happy to answer some questions if you want to fire them up, Martin.
Alex, thanks for that. So really interesting to get that insight. And just to confirm to you, we were seeing the right graphic as you were talking us through that, and you made it very clear. A question here from somebody who's remaining anonymous. If all stores are doing the same opening times, don't you think it will badly affect the commute and congestion?
Short answer is yes. And I think that we need to think certainly about later starting times. I think that's clearly to kind of get a store ready and open and ready, it takes a bit of time. You're better versed on that than I am. And what we don't want is that AM peak being overloaded. I think one of the things we're struggling with in some stations is that kind of 6, 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, that peak. So that's the key thing we need to avoid. So it needs to be later than that if we can possibly avoid it. But I think if everyone in the West End turns their shops on at the same time, that is creating a peak in itself. So some variation would be appreciated.
Okay. Chris Shaw asks the question, when will Crossrail open so there is a safe increase in capacity?
Very good question, Chris. I think we was previously, it was kind of mid-21, and and it is also going to be with Bond Street open at the same time as the main line. Now, Crossrail has been, like all of our projects, has been what we call safe stopped. So the work on site was stopped. There's some work going on in terms of safety critical work, but the main construction sites have been stopped, and we are in discussions with government and the Mayor's office about when is a kind of safe time to restart those. That will probably affect the timing of Crossrail. However, it's worth noting that a lot of the work on Crossrail is on testing, and it is people testing the IT systems and things like that. So a lot of that stuff has been happening anyway. So we are not in a position to give a date as to whether that's going to change. But as soon as we've got a confirmed date, it will be announced in the usual way through the Crossroad board and to the stock exchange and through the TfL board as well. But it's that project has been stopped. We don't know the implications for the start date at Crossroad at the moment.
Somebody who's remaining anonymous, but I think it's an interesting question. The question is this: why don't we have public transportation back to normal levels? This would mean better social distancing. A reduced service is meaning a packed service. I think what the point they're getting at there, and I don't know where we are and whether the question is still technically correct, but my understanding was that the number of trains on the tube, the number of buses doing the routes have been reduced. I mean, what is your expectation about when they will be up to, certainly in terms of the numbers of trains, the number of buses, up to the normal levels, so that there's as much opportunity for people to spread out as much as possible?
Well, the thing to highlight and remember in this is that train drivers and bus drivers are affected by COVID as well as your staff. So I think around 40 transport employees have died as a result of COVID thus far, and we have people who are self-isolating with their families because they're worried they've got it. So our staff resource has been depleted through this pandemic, as well as yours has, really. So the reality, we need to be mindful that we do not have the labour force available from day one to do this. Having said that, we will increase the public transport capacity from what it is this week to next week. I think the tube got up to run from about 60% now to 75% on Monday, and we will look to get further increases incrementally as we go, really. So we get the point about increasing capacity to support social distancing, and we're doing it on the tube, on the buses, on the rail network. But just be mindful that transport industry workers are not immune from this pandemic. We are affected by it, and the employees' families are affected by it, and therefore that does affect the resources available out there to operate the system.
That all makes complete sense. Is the expectation and the desire, though, to ramp up the capacity in terms of the number of trains and buses as quickly as possible, dependent on your availability of staff to be able to do that? Is that essentially the direction of travel?
Yes, exactly. And the first step up is Monday the 18th. And that's why if you look at that chart, you've got the blue line as it is today, and the red line is with 100% service. So we are moving from the blue line to the red line. But I think even with that 100% operating, the point we're getting across is that we've got a significantly reduced capacity on the network because of the 2 metre social distancing. But I completely agree with the point that we need to increase our capacity incrementally, which is what we are doing.
Interesting question here from Lee, and it's one which I've heard a number of my friends raise. Should electric scooters be encouraged now as a means of getting staff to work? And my understanding is that actually they're illegal, but some countries I've heard have actually made them legal to give people other ways of getting out and about their cities without necessarily having to increase the burden on the public transport system.
Well, the Secretary of State for Transport, Grant Shapps, referred to that in his statement on Saturday. And you're right, I think their current status is they're illegal on the public highway. But he did mention that they were looking at accelerating the trials to enable electric scooters to be used on the public highway. I'm afraid I'm not sure of the detail about pace, but he certainly recognised that that is an option that he wants to see considered in this recovery phase. But certainly it's DfT's decision, but they've indicated that they want to look at e-scooters, definitely.
Interesting. I'd missed that particular update. There's of course so much information, it's impossible to keep up on everything. So thank you for bringing us up to date on that issue. Another question here from an anonymous contributor, but wanting to know, are we able to read or see somewhere where each station's capacity is and at what times we should be attending each station to get on a train? So presumably arriving at or leaving at a time when it's the least likely to be busy.
That's a really good question, and I think what it highlights is that there is an onus on us, and we will respond to that challenge to provide more information around where those hotspots are. We've got that. We just need to work out what is the most appropriate form of that, getting that up on our website or to employees and businesses in a timely way. As I said earlier, we know where the hotspot stations are. None of those are in the West End at the moment, and your capacities are well below what they need to be at the moment, or what you need in terms of social distancing. But I think it's a very good point about we need to help people make good decisions about what is the time to come in, and we are looking at that, and we're trying to get information out as quickly as we can in an accurate form. The one caveat I would say with that is that it will be as up to date as it can be, which is probably stating what the patterns of behaviour of a certain station are in the week or so preceding. It's not real time and live. We can't tell you if you went down to the station now whether it's busy or quiet, but we could certainly help people make informed decisions about quiet times to use stations. So I think it's a very fair question, and we know that we need to provide more timely information, and we're on it. I just can't give you a specific time as to when that will be available, but we want that information out there.
Alex, isn't the reality that even when you have stores opening up in the West End later than they would do, the reality is that the pressure points are still going to be the start of the working day and towards the end of the working day, and that if you travel outside those times, the likelihood is the network is going to be less busy?
Yes, well, I think that's a very good summary as it is today, and as it could be with restart. One of the complexities of this process is that we're not just looking at retail and office employment in isolation. The government is also announcing schools going back on the same day, and there will be further relaxations in July. As well, we think there will be further relaxation in July. So I think one of our challenges as managing the network is to try and understand the cumulative impacts of this. It might be that the information we're providing you now says that the off-peak between 10 and 4 is fine. If schools go back on the 1st of June, well, maybe that off-peak in the afternoon won't be fine. I don't know. So that's one of the things we're looking at and trying to model and understand how best we adapt to that. But I think the onus is on us is to provide information on those busy and quiet times on the public transport network, and we're going to look at that definitely.
Question here, will you be removing every other seat on the tube and buses as in other European countries?
Short of no, and it goes back to the point I made earlier on, that is that we want the approach to managing transport in London to be consistent with the approach to managing transport in the rest of the UK. And we don't want different rules in London to the rest of the UK. And at the moment, the advice from the DfT is to not remove every other seat or put stickers on every other seat. It's more than every other seat, to be honest. You do 2 metre social distancing. And it is to look at face coverings, hand sanitizer, and a bit about kind of personal responsibility, really. If you about using it at different times and not using it at all, to be honest, in many cases. So we are looking at stickers and information on the platforms and potentially outside the stations if we get queues outside there. But in terms of on the vehicles, on the trains, or the tube trains or the DLR and things like that, we're not looking at taking out seats or putting stickers on seats.
One of our viewers is asking about fares, asking if they're going to be frozen given the huge dent in your revenue as a TfL because of the effects of COVID-19. Will the fares be frozen?
The fares are reviewed every at the end of every calendar year, and new fares start in January. So there are no proposals to change the fares as they exist today throughout the rest of this calendar year. What the mayor chooses to do at the end of the year, I can't predict really. It's for him to decide the fare levels as he sees fit.
Stephen is asking whether construction work should have restarted today in the way that the government has been giving guidance that it should do.
Well, that's a decision for a politician, really. I think it's worth noting that many construction sites didn't stop at all. Some kind of carried on regardless. We, as an organisation, took a decision to safe stop all of our construction activity for Crossroad, for other rail projects, and also our highway projects. I think it's for government to make a judgment about when they go back. Our advice to the construction industry is that if you are going back, think about those start and finish times, because one of our concerns is, certainly you can probably see this on some of the pictures on social media, is that it does appear that some of those early morning peak users are probably construction workers going to start at that 8 AM shift and things like that, or 7 AM. And what we're advising companies is actually look at different times to start those shifts rather than everyone starting those shifts, because we don't want NHS workers not being able to get to hospitals for their work, or care workers not being able to get to their early morning shifts because they don't feel safe getting on there because it's full of construction workers or other workers. So the priority at that time is very much NHS workers.
Okay, Shirley is asking about licensed taxi services in London and asking if there's any specific cleaning regimes which they are required to do, presumably between customers. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, thank you, Shirley. Well, there's two types of vehicles. There's the licensed black cabs, and there's also the private hired trade. The licensed black cab is quite interesting, really. If there was ever a vehicle designed for this crisis, it's the licensed black cab, because it's designed to be easily and readily cleaned. It's got that physical barrier between a driver and a passenger, and it's kind of great in terms of managing this crisis. The private hire trays, the smaller vehicles, it's more it's more complicated because it's a range of vehicles being used, and I know that we have asked for Public Health England for bespoke advice for what needs to be done in private hire vehicles, and that is going to be published, I think, this week actually. But that will set out the requirements for cleaning and also any temporary measures in there for cabs and private hire vehicles. So it's due to be published soon, but it's on the back of specific advice from Public Health England.
Really interesting point you made there about the licensed black cabs. I hadn't thought of that, and it's one of those things, as you hear it, you think, gosh, that makes complete sense. We've got time for 2 more questions. Before I turn to the penultimate question, just a comment here from Steph. Thank you to all the tube, train, bus drivers, cleaners, guards, all unsung heroes. I'm sure she is making a point that the vast majority, if not 100% of our viewers all agree with. A question here from somebody who is remaining anonymous. Will there be an increase in British Transport Police on trains and buses to monitor social distancing or protecting the well-being of passengers?
Well, first off, thanks, Steph, for the comment earlier. I completely agree with you. I think they're doing a really difficult job in very difficult circumstances. So I do appreciate that comment. In terms of the deployment of the British Transport Police, Yes, and it's already happening. Just as an example, after the on Monday morning, when we thought there was going to be a spike in demand, we had an extra 300 British Transport Police officers out there in the morning, and we will, that deployment resource will ebb and flow depending on how the British Transport Police feel that they need to increase resource to deal with social distancing issues. At the moment, their deployment is all focused around where those hotspot stations are. So, Canning Town, Stratford, West Ham, that's the kind of places they'll be at to encourage social distancing, but also speaking to people before they travel in some cases to actually just check within, is their journey essential, do they need to use public transport? And I think their very presence has been tremendous in actually helping deal with those hotspots and deal with social distancing within it. So the British Transport Police will be an active part of managing this recovery in a safe and sustainable way.
Okay, the last question is this: will the tubes be sprayed and cleaned during the day?
There is, since March, I think it's March, it was March, wasn't it? We enhanced the cleaning regime, and it's a cleaning regime which has got, it's using kind of hospital quality products. I'm afraid I don't know the quality, the particular code of it really, and it's a form of disinfectant that's used and has a long lifespan, and we have enhanced and increased that cleaning regime. There is already cleaning that happens during the working day anyway, and I think there's increased concern about that really. So we have enhanced cleaning regime, and that includes cleaning during the day as well. Yeah.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for all of those questions and all of the answers. And indeed, thanks to all our guests and to all those who joined us and asked questions. As I mentioned earlier, our next webinar is the rescheduled Kickstarting London's Economy. This will take place this Friday at 10 AM with the Deputy Mayor for Business, Rajesh Agarwal, and Laura Citron, who is Chief Executive of London and Partners. Our 6th West End Resilience Live will then run as usual on Wednesday, the 20th of May at 4 PM, when we'll be hearing from St Linton's Crosby's CT Group. We'll be joined by John Walker, who is a former Westminster Chief Planner and now Chief Executive Director at CT Local. And we'll be hearing from Sam Lyon, who is Managing Director at CT Partners, on what is the driving force behind consumer behaviour and perceptions. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye and keep safe.